Hey guys, Aaron here. Today we're going to be replacing the carrier bearing on this drive shaft of this Nissan Titan. This procedure is the same for all two-wheel drive Nissan Titans, years 2004 and through 2015. Four-wheel drives do not have a carrier bearing, but we are going to be replacing actually the grease in the slip yoke. I'm going to show you how to cut these off. We're going to keep the boot because it's not cracked, but we're going to go ahead and put some new clamps on. So we're kind of just going to do a minor service of this drive shaft. This is actually a really common issue on these Titans. This vehicle is experiencing a clunk when it goes into gear or reverse, and also a little bit of vibration in the drive shaft as well. There's a mount that goes around the bearing, and that mount tends to rip and crack, and we're going to inspect the bearing itself. We're just going to replace the whole unit. So before we get started, let's go ahead and go over the tools you're going to need to get the job done right. Alright, so here's what you're going to need. You're going to need a pair of 17mm wrenches, a 14 or 9/16mm socket. This is just my power ratchet. Works pretty well, but you could use a regular 3/8 ratchet. You're going to be using an air chisel, hammer, just regular cold chisel will work too, and some wheel bearing grease. So let's go ahead and get started with the first thing. Alright, so the first step, go ahead and jack your vehicle up using properly rated jack and jack stands. Second step we're going to do is put the parking brake on. Since we are taking off the drive shaft, the rear wheels will be free to turn, so we definitely want to keep those rear wheels locked. That way it doesn't want to go anywhere on us when we're underneath the vehicle. Alright, so there's two bolts that hold on the carrier bearing assembly itself. There's actually studs that point upwards. There's one over here and one over there. What we're going to do first is just hit it up with some WD-40. This vehicle doesn't have a lot of rust, but some areas around the country, you're going to get a lot of rust on those bolts. It's just going to help us keep those nuts from seizing. So we're going to go and remove those with our 14mm. Alright, so once we got the nuts off of the carrier bearing, what we're going to want to go ahead and do is remove all 4 bolts at the back of the drive shaft, and this is the rear differential here. You're going to need a pair of 17mm wrenches, and the back side here is the actual nut. This is the side that you're going to want to turn first. Turning the bolt's going to be a little bit more difficult, but once we have that, we're going to go ahead and just back off this drive shaft, and essentially the drive shaft's free to come out. Alright, so we got all the hardware off, everything's unbolted, the drive shaft's ready to come out. One thing to notice when you take the drive shaft out of the tail shaft, or the output shaft of the transmission, you will have some transmission fluid coming out. That's normal. Make sure you have a pan or something to catch that oil so you don't get everything all dirty, greasy, your driveway or whatever. So we're just basically going to take the drive shaft out towards the rear of the vehicle, put it on the bench so we can go ahead and service the carrier bearing. Alright, so we got the drive shaft out of the vehicle on the bench. First thing we're going to need to do is take off this boot and separate the 2 drive shafts so we can get to this bearing. Now there's 2 ways really to take these boots off. Either cut the clamp or uncrimp the clamp, and that way you can actually reuse the clamp. To uncrimp them, what you're going to go ahead and do is take your flat blade screwdriver and kind of get this uncrimped, make it a little bit larger. Then what we can do is get some needle nose pliers and take these ends off, and that way the clamp can expand and we can take that together. So I'm going to try that first. Hopefully I can save the clamps. If not, we're going to cut them off. Okay, so I was able to salvage them. Both clamps are off. Now all you simply do is take your slip yoke and separate the drive shafts. Now this is the area you're going to want to clean and put new grease on when we take off our carrier bearing and replace it. It's kind of the last step to do. Now we're going to focus on getting this carrier bearing off. It is pressed on, so it's not pressed on too much though. So you can actually take a scribe or a screwdriver, a chisel, and a hammer and back it off. So that's what we're going to attempt to do now. Alright, so I went ahead and cut off the rubber bushing, and what I'm going to attempt, because I did try a chisel, didn't get too far, got it to move a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and speed things up with an air chisel or an air hammer. This is a very, very, very helpful tool. Basically I'm just going to get it a little underneath here and pop it right off. It should come off perfectly. If it doesn't, you're going to need to get a press or take it to a shop that has a press to press it off, but it should come off with an air chisel, no problem. Also, one note before we do that, you really want to avoid putting this in a vise or anything like that. this drive shaft, this part of the drive shaft and that shaft is weighted, it's balanced, so denting it or misforming it really can cause damage to it. So you just gotta use a little bit of caution and safety when handling these. Definitely no vise or anything like that. Alright, so now that we got off the carrier bearing off of the drive shaft, what we want to do before installing the new one, take some emery cloth, sandpaper, steel wool, anything, take off the surface rust that you see right here. That's going to make pressing and sliding on the new carrier bearing a whole lot easier. Also, when we add the grease, we definitely don't want any of this getting onto the grease, which could possibly wear out our slip yoke. So let's go ahead, clean it up, and then we're going to press on the new bearing. Alright, so we got it cleaned up. What I like to do now is take a little bit of grease, apply it to the drive shaft, that way the new bearing slides on easily. Take note of this little bell right here. This faces outwards, just like this. Don't flip it around or else you might run into some issues there. So go ahead and press it on. What you could do is take your new collar. Your new bearing should have a collar that looks like this. It goes on just like that, and lightly tap with a hammer, and it should press on fairly easy. Don't go too far, go just to where it stops right here, and once it stops pressing, that way you know it's good to go. Alright, so we got the new bearing on, got the new collar on, now we're ready to reassemble the drive shaft. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and throw some grease on the slip yoke. I'm using this Lucas Extra Heavy Duty grease right here. This is just a wheel bearing grease that's rated for higher temperatures, high speed bearings, and irregular maintenance. It's pretty good stuff. I use it on all of our fleet equipment. I've been using it for years, so it's what I recommend using on this. If you don't have this, you could just use any old, just wheel bearing grease. So just go ahead, throw it in the grooves, and then one thing to note, that there is actually a double tooth on this drive shaft. Let me see there it is right there. You can see right here how the groove is not as recessed as the other ones. Just keep note that this is keyed, so you can't just put it in any position. If you have trouble putting it together, that's going to be why. Alright, so we got the drive shaft ready to install, got our new bearing on, got our yoke nice and lubed up. Our flange yoke right here, the bolts need to be torqued down to 61 foot-pounds. That's the spec from Nissan. Pretty important to get that right. Also, another thing too, this yoke on the side of the transmission is keyed. So you'll have to have it in the correct position to install it. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we're going to take it for a test drive. Alright, just got done with the test drive, and the difference is pretty good. Shifts a lot smoother, no more clunking when you go into gear. Definitely a worthwhile thing. So I hope this video has helped you out, guys. If it has, please like and subscribe. If you got any questions, leave something in the comment section. I'll do my best to get back. If you do the job a different way, or if you're stuck with anything, definitely let me know. So until next time, guys, take care.